Welcome to episode 7 of Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Today's episode is going to be all about side quests, so let's get right into it. First up is Mount Mortar, the cave that you can enter as soon as you have the Ecruteak City Gym badge, but you can't fully explore it until you have all the badges and HMs, which is kind of a shame because I think it's really great that Generation 2 has so many optional areas. It's just a shame that you have to wait until you have many of the HMs in order to actually explore them, and you have to actually carry the HM users with you. And hilariously, for this dungeon in particular, you actually want to come in here with only 5 Pokemon in the party instead of 6, because the reward for completing this dungeon and exploring it fully is a gift Pokemon, and those don't get sent to the PC automatically anymore when you get them, so you gotta have an open spot in the party, and that's really annoying, and I can kind of see where some of the complaints about this game are coming from, because honestly, everything I just described is a lot of unnecessary annoyances for people who actually want to explore this dungeon and find all of its rewards. Especially when you consider that the only way to get up here is to have all 8 badges anyways. The reward is a Pokemon that you're probably not going to use for the rest of the game if you made it this far. And since I'm thinking about this now, I would just like to say for the record that I totally understand the complaints people have with the Johto gym leaders not using Johto Pokemon in general being very difficult to find or underwhelming when you actually get them, or even just the RNG involved in finding some of the Pokemon in this game without a swarm, and to find a swarm, you have to have the correct phone number in your contact list. And in Crystal version, if you want the evolution stones, you have to get separate phone numbers for that as well. At least if you want to get them before the post-game, or rely on Mystery Gift. Oh, and while you're up here, be sure to take a small detour here in order to find the single Dragon Scale in the game. This is the item that turns Seadra into Kingdra. That's all it's good for. It is another trade evolution item, and I know people are annoyed with those as well. I should mention again that even though the Dragon Scale is a consumable, like with all the other trade evolution items, they can be farmed. They're really annoying to farm, but it's worth noting. See, one of the reasons I wanted to get into Gen 2 so quickly was because I kept hearing over and over about how it's supposedly the worst in the entire series, and I wanted to know for sure just how true that actually was. And while I totally get that this game has some not-so-good ideas about evolutions or how to get certain Pokemon or even certain game mechanics, that hasn't really stopped Gen 2 from being a blast to play in general. I mean, just go back and look at all of the weird strategies that I've come up with for Gen 2. I feel like I'm better able to do that in Gen 2 than in Gen 1 because the leveling in Gen 2 feels a lot faster. Not only that, there's quite a lot of side content in Gen 2. I'm dedicating an entire video to optional dungeons here. I mean, just for this dungeon in particular, they decided to make it so that if you climb up that waterfall and then go way into the back of the cave, solving a maze along the way, you will find a single black belt who's been training here, and some of the trainers in Mount Mortar actually talk about him. And by defeating him, which is not that difficult, all he has is Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, defeating him nets you a brand new Pokemon that you can't find anywhere else in the game unless you decide to transfer in a Hitmonchan or Hitmonlee from Gen 1 and then breed it, because the reward you get is the baby form of Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. You actually don't have to breed for this particular baby form. And if you're thinking there's no way anybody would bother with this because, first of all, who's gonna know that there's a black belt with a Tyrogue that deep in this cave? Well, the thing is, back in those days, if you were the one to discover something like this, that'd make you feel pretty good, because you would do something that no one else had done. You could impress your friends at the lunch table by being the only person to actually explore the cave and find something like this. Well, actually, when I told people about things like this at the lunch table, they generally mocked me for being a nerd, but you know. Anyway, Tyrogue evolves at level 20 and will become one of 3 different fighting-type Pokemon based on its attack and defense stats. One of the forms requires its attack and defense to be exactly the same, so that can be a little bit annoying to get. Meanwhile, Chris actually bumped into Suicune again while walking around at random. I don't really know if you're supposed to find Suicune at all of the locations he can appear at like this, but it wouldn't really make sense because no one's talked about that kind of thing. So there you go, that's another location he can appear at. we'll deal with him later. I also had yet another stroke of good luck and got a call from Fisher Tully saying he's got an item for me, and I know what that means, so let's go out and meet him. Again, evolution stones in Johto are very annoying to get because you have to have a specific phone contact in your contact list, and you have to randomly get a call from them. In my case, it was extremely lucky to not only get an evolution stone, but to get a water stone in particular, because that actually enables us to unlock something in another area. So I'm going to have to go and explore that. I wasn't planning on doing it in this video, but I might as well. Then again, there are some Johto Pokemon that I haven't shown yet, so I suppose I should go to this optional area that I'm referring to because that's where they appear. So let's do it. Our next destination is going to be the Ruins of Alph. What, you thought there was only one puzzle room in the ruins? Nope, there's actually 4 of them, and you unlock more as you play through more of the game. You need Surf to access this next one, and the puzzle requires another HM on top of that. I'm gonna ignore the slider puzzles for now because all those do is get you more forms of unknown. I can imagine you guys might not want to see me capture all of those. So the word on the wall is Flash, which pretty obviously means you're gonna have to use Flash in order to open up the next room. For whatever reason, when I see Gen 2 and Flash, I think of the word hurry for some reason. Anyways, the next room has some more items. I think these are actually pretty good. A Goldberry is pretty good for how early in the game you can get it. And the Moonstone is, of course, very nice. Crystal actually has several more Moonstones, I think, than Gold and Silver do. This is definitely an additional Moonstone on top of whatever you can find in the original Gold and Silver, and some additional herbs, which are probably outclassed by regular healing items at this point. Like, you can get Hyper Potions at this point, and they won't affect your friendship values. So yes, there's another set of words on the floor there. There's not really much to them. They don't say a whole lot. Anyways, the Ruins of Alph are actually interesting for having multiple entrances that will get you access to more puzzle rooms if you find them, and to get to those rooms you have to go through Union Cave. So go to the bottom floor of the cave and then surf across that pond of water, and there are also some trainers here as well. Apparently they live down here. There's plenty of space, but I can't really imagine living in a cave like this. Like, what are you guys eating? The fish Pokemon? Anyways, push the strength boulder and you come out in this area here. So hop off the ledge and go into the next cave, and this one opens up straight away because the hint in this room to unlock the next room with bonus items is the word water, and that's referring to a water stone. So I'm lucky I have one. I can actually just come in here and pick up all of these items as long as the water stone is in my inventory. Seriously, that's a very vague hint. Water could have referred to the Mystic Water, which you also get in this room. And you can also find Stardust, which is basically a nugget. You sell it for a bunch of money, and there's also a star piece, which you can exchange for a new badge at Shooting Star Summit. Wait a minute, wrong game. There's also some more words on the floor. It's really not that much. It's just a bunch of stuff about how humans and Pokemon need to further their bonds, and doesn't really say a whole lot about the unknown, what they are, and all of that. The Ruins of Alph can be disappointing in that regard, but, you know, I guess keeping the mystery is more important than actually saying what it is, because then you'd lose the magic that way. Also, in the Chamber with the Unknown, if you open the radio and listen to this frequency, you get a weird sound. It's creepy, but it doesn't really do anything. I mean, if it caused more unknown to appear or something, that might be interesting, but it's just a weird thing on the radio that kind of reminds me of the word flash for some reason. Also in this area, if you take the other path and go through this cave, you will find yet another trainer who I've beaten already, and there is some grass here. This grass is the only way to get a couple of Pokemon that appear in this area. They're not unknown. These are actual new Pokemon that don't appear anywhere else in the game. You just have to find them in the Ruins of Alph for some reason. Not even inside the cave, just this weird patch of grass. So one of the Pokemon you can get is a weird-looking psychic bird called Natu, or Natu, or... yeah, never mind the pronunciation of this Pokemon's name. It's a psychic bird. Its level is probably too low for me to use at this point, but if I had gotten it back when it first became available, maybe it would have been a mainstay of my team, I don't know. Gold already has Alakazam though, so I don't really need another psychic type. At any rate, this Pokemon may be well off the beaten path, but at least I don't have to deal with swarms or encounter it at a 1 out of 100 encounter rate, right? You just have to backtrack to an earlier area and open a new side path with the ability that lets you go through it. In fact, there's a lot of that in Gen 2 as well. It almost reminds me of, Metroid, actually. Feels very much like Metroidvanias. New abilities let you explore old areas and find new side paths. It's really nice. And that's not all, there's actually another new Pokemon in the Ruins of Elf. The Beagle Painter, named Smeargle. I have no idea why they decided to combine painting with a dog, but here we are. Smeargle is actually very noteworthy. It can copy any move in the game that is used against it. Unfortunately, it copied one of my moves, which means the one I just caught is stuck with a really bad move, unfortunately, but hey, I can capture another one and have it learn any moveset that I please. It's actually a really neat idea for a gimmick Pokemon, and is used very much in competitive play. Now, this is a solid creation, all things considered. Also, if you pay a visit to Route 29 way back at the beginning of the game on a Tuesday, you will meet a woman who will give you a pink bow. Fairly mundane item, but actually speedrunners always start their runs on Tuesdays so they can get this item. It's very nice to have that early in the game. So in reality, you could say that this lady meets a lot of people on Tuesday simply because speedrunners are always meeting her. I mean, you might think it's special that you ran into her, but for this lady,
it was Tuesday.
Anyways, enough mundane stuff, now it's time to catch us some legendary Pokemon. Starting with the Beast Trio, the most annoying legendaries in this game. Just getting these guys out of the way right now. And suffice to say, they are as annoying to encounter and capture as you've probably heard they are. The way they work is that they wander the region randomly after encountering them in the Burned Tower. If you end up on the same map as them, they can be encountered in the grass in place of regular encounters, and it's recommended to use repellent to keep the regular encounters away while you search for your legendary beast. Just make sure the first Pokemon in your party is not level 41 or higher, or you will end up repelling the legendary beast as well. Now, to describe their movements, it's best to imagine the Johto region as a giant game board, with each map being a space on that board. Each time you take a step to another space, the legendary will also take a step to another space. However, the legendary beasts cannot stop on a town map, they have to be on a route map. So each time they take a step, they're actually going to move to the next available route, and they choose their direction at random. So you need to check the Pokédex to see their current location, which requires randomly running into them at least once, and then you can make a prediction as to where they'll go when you change maps. And by the way, by change maps, I don't mean just walking to another route, I mean going inside of a building also causes them to move. And some routes are separated by guard towers, that's going to count as 2 map changes. And also, if you decide to fly to another city, they will then randomly move to another route in the region regardless of where they just were. So don't think you can just fly to where they currently are and then get them that way. Once you're actually in the battle with them, you need to stop them from fleeing, which they often do on the first turn. So Gengar is hands down the best Pokemon for this. Fast enough to outspeed them, and it learns Mean Look, which will stop them from running away, and Hypnosis, which will put them to sleep, and Nightshade is a good damage dealing move. It lets you control just how much damage you are doing since it can't crit, and nothing but a normal type can resist it. Unfortunately, even if you used Mean Look, there is a way for them to escape the battle. They have a move called Roar, which will automatically end the wild encounter and cause them to move to another route, even if you had used Mean Look. That is kinda mean to stack on top of all the other annoyances that you have to deal with. However, the developers did give you at least one concession. You see, if you damage these guys and they flee the encounter, then they will retain that damage when you re-encounter them again, and I presume the same applies to status conditions. However, sleep is the best status condition for capturing them, so they'll probably have woken up from that. Once they're asleep and at low health, it's simply a matter of tossing your Ultra Balls and hoping one of them works, because in Gen 2, the legendaries have a much lower catch rate than they did in Gen 1. Or at least the catch chance formula is not as weirdly programmed as it was in Gen 1. Something like that. At any rate, you're asking for a lot of luck, and honestly, I'm not sure I like catching legendaries in Gen 2. I mean, in Gen 1 it was very easy. I caught most of them in like 3 Ultra Balls once they were frozen. But this time around, I had to spend a lot of Ultra Balls on these guys, and couple that with the fact that they wander around the region, it wasn't as fun as maybe finding them at the end of a dungeon, but the idea of chasing a legendary across the region does have its appeal. Maybe just make it not so reliant on chance next time, which they unfortunately don't. Roaming legendaries return in Generation 3, and in particular in the remakes of Gen 1, if your legendary beast decides to roar to escape the encounter, the game mistakenly removes the legendary beast from the game entirely, and you have no chance of finding them again. Oopsie. Anyway, the reason I wanted to capture them in Crystal version is because only 2 of the legendary beasts in Crystal version will be wandering the region. The third, Suicune, actually has an entire side quest associated with it. Once you get the Clear Bell after completing the Radio Tower section of the game, you can return to Ecruteak City and go inside the Tin Tower to find Suicune. The Tin Tower itself is a little strange, so in Gold and Silver versions you can find an item that unlocks this dungeon, but in Crystal version, the actual dungeon part of the dungeon does not unlock until you've captured all 3 legendary beasts and done something in the post-game, so that's a little bit annoying. And if you miss one of the legendary beasts by accidentally knocking them out, for example, you've permanently lost access to the Tin Tower. So do save the game before you go legendary hunting, just in case. Also, in Gold and Silver version, this room is normally empty, but in Crystal version, you have to challenge and defeat the Wise Trio before you have the right to attempt capturing Suicune. These guys are, well, they're boring. Their teams consist of a Noctowl and then 1 of the Gen 1 evolutions, and that's it. Was that seriously all you could do with these guys? There are so many more interesting Pokemon in this game, I swear. They also exposit more backstory about the 2 towers and the legendaries that dwell within them, which I think is very interesting. Gen 1 had very little mythos, if you will, regarding the legendaries besides Mewtwo, so it's nice that they actually have a story to tell with regards to the legendary beasts and the 2 birds that resided in the 2 towers. The only thing dragging this down is the fact that when you beat the 3rd trainer, the game's writing kind of implies that there is some kind of a chosen one plot going on, with the legendary awaiting a certain trainer, and that trainer just so happens to be you. I mean, if the legendary is waiting for a trainer to earn the right to capture them, then I am totally okay with that, that's fine. That gives the player a lot more agency rather than them being chosen by destiny or whatever. Also, there's a short cutscene with Suicune coming up, and what's interesting about it is that I didn't find this out until very recently, but it turns out that in this cutscene with Suicune before you battle him, the other 2 legendary beasts can appear here if you haven't caught them yet, but I have caught them, so they don't appear in this scene. Really nice little detail to add. Sadly, there's not a lot I can say about the battle with Suicune. It basically goes down the same way as the other 2 did. However, this time, Suicune can't run away from the fight by using Roar, so using Mean Look is kind of redundant, but you can never be too sure, I suppose. I mean, think about it. This glorious legendary's moveset includes Gust. The legendary water beast, and it knows Gust? That's kinda strange. Is it like a storm or something? Because it knows Rain Dance, which is another weather-type move. I don't really get it. Well, actually, it may amuse you to know that I actually ran out of Ultra Balls and Great Balls in this battle, so I had to resort to regular Pokeballs, and that's what I wound up capturing Suicune with. Unfortunately, they don't start tracking which ball you caught a Pokemon with until Generation 3, so this video is really the only proof I have that I caught Suicune with a regular Pokeball. I suppose you could say that after capturing all 5 legendaries for this video, I'm kinda hoping that in the future they find a way to make capturing stuff a little bit more varied than simply lowering them down to a little bit of health and then putting them to sleep and then throwing a bunch of Ultra Balls until one of them gets lucky and actually successfully captures. It'd just be nice to have to alter my thinking about legendary encounters just a little bit. At any rate, after defeating or capturing Suicune, and remember, defeating him means you lose access to the rest of the Tin Tower, the Wise Trio and that guy whose name I can't ever pronounce, they arrive and congratulate you for a job well done. They also have a little bit more backstory and will give you a hint as to how to access the rest of the tower, and they also wonder about the legendary that roosted at the top of the burned tower back when it was not a burnt tower. It used to be called the Brass Tower. Come to think of it, a tower made of brass and a tower made of tin. These don't sound like the most sturdy pieces of architecture. No wonder the pillar in the center of the tower is constantly shaking. So getting back to non-crystal versions of the game, in Gold version, the Tin Tower opens up immediately after getting the Rainbow Wing from the Radio Tower, and you'll be able to climb to the top and capture the legendary that's up there instead of capturing the Beast Trio first like you have to do in Crystal. So that's what I'm gonna show off next. Now, this isn't much of a dungeon, unfortunately. It's got some puzzles, it's a bit of a maze, but the encounters consist exclusively of Rattata, which is not really that threatening, but I can't really imagine what other Pokemon would reside in the tower besides Ghastly, which do appear at night. And I guess that is a little bit spooky. But seriously, no other encounters besides Rattata? That doesn't strike me as very interesting, so I'm just gonna repel all of that away. Seriously though, throw in like a bird or two somewhere around here. I mean, they had Magmar in the bottom floor of the Burn Tower at least. Weak encounters aside, this is a fairly straightforward dungeon. You're basically hopping across these ledges and going through a bit of a maze. Naturally, I will be showing the correct paths through each floor, and towards the end of the dungeon, there are some teleporter mazes as well. I say mazes, but the path through the teleporters is actually fairly simple. Not so much if you want to get all the items. Though, to be honest, I've noticed that a lot of the items in dungeons like this tend to be consumables. Rare consumables, mind you. There's things like max elixirs and max revives, but they're just consumables nonetheless. It would be nice if there was a TM or something up here. I mean, that would mean if you want to collect all the TMs, you'd have to go out of your way to get it, but most of the TMs in Gen 2 aren't really that good. I think in Mount Mortar, I actually missed a TM for, get this, Defense Curl. Defense Curl! That's a TM in this game? So we've got Fury Cutter, Mud Slap, Defense Curl. Oh, but don't worry, there'll be some good TMs in the future, trust me. At any rate, we're nearing the top of the tower, which is where we are going to battle a legendary Pokemon. Pretty awesome that we get to fight something on the roof of the 9-story tall tower. Even more awesome, night fell just as I was approaching the Pokemon, so that's pretty awesome too. And now, ladies and gentlemen, may I present the legendary bird Pokemon, and I really do hate calling him this, Ho-Oh. That's what he's called, Ho-Oh. I know, okay, I know it's the Japanese word for phoenix, that's literally what it means, but like, come on, you couldn't come up with anything else? Is the name Suzaku too overused or something? Or were you saving that in case they decided to make a Pokemon based on Suzaku? This battle was a lot more difficult than the Beast Trio when it comes to capturing, simply because Ho-Oh has moves like Gust, and also Recover, which will undo any damage you do to it, and Safeguard, which is a new move that prevents status conditions for 5 turns. That includes things like Freeze and Sleep, which you kinda need to put on this guy if you want to have any hope of capturing him. I start this battle by lowering its accuracy. I want to do this so that it wastes all of the power points on its new signature move, Sacred Fire, a high-powered fire attack that inflicts burn status. Since Weepinbell is the Pokemon I used to put it to sleep, I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't get hit with a fire attack. However, I instead got lucky and managed to land a Freeze with Ice Punch. Freeze status is no longer permanent in Generation 2, it has a 10% chance of going away each turn. However, there are actually moves that can be used in spite of being frozen, like Sacred Fire. And the reason for that is, using Sacred Fire would actually thaw out the user, but I think you have to actually hit with the move because here, Ho-Oh uses Sacred Fire, misses because of all those accuracy drops I gave it, and does not thaw out. This is actually really strange, and I don't think this is documented on any of the sites I looked this stuff up on, so, you got me. For Silver, a different dungeon has opened up in the west, so we're gonna head that way next. Now, I was playing Silver version on a Monday, so this lady appears and gives Silver a sharp beak. A disembodied beak that somehow increases the power of flying-type moves when a Pokemon holds it. That's a little bit disturbing. The next dungeon is called the Whirl Islands, so named because you need Whirlpool to access them. There are actually 4 entrances into the caves beneath the islands, however, if all you are here for is the legendary Pokemon, there's really only one entrance you actually need to go inside of, which is maybe just a little bit disappointing if you were expecting a long trek to actually get to the legendary at the end. But then again, I keep talking about these dungeons like they're Zelda dungeons rather than Pokemon dungeons, and there's a world of difference between the two. I suppose now's a good time to mention, however, that no matter which version you're playing, all of these dungeons and legendaries are available eventually. In Gold version, you unlock the Tin Tower first, but in the post-game you can still unlock the Whirl Islands by finding the right item. And actually, you don't unlock the dungeon itself, you just get the item that makes the legendary appear. You can go in the Whirl Islands as soon as you have Whirlpool, but you can't go in the Tin Tower without the Rainbow Wing, it's weird. Whichever legendary you find first will be at level 40, and the other one will be at level 70, which might drastically alter the battle because they could potentially have different moves. I'll have to look that up. In Crystal version, the legendary birds are at level 60, you have to wait until the post-game to get the one in the Whirl Islands, and you have to have the entire Beast Trio captured in order to get Ho-Oh. I guess these changes might come off as a little bit strange, restricting a Pokemon that was available much earlier in Gold version, but whatever. I can definitely say I appreciate that you don't have to own multiple versions of the game to get all of the legendaries. In fact, on that note, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's possible to complete the Gen 2 Pokédex, barring Mythicals, of course, if you own at least Yellow version and then any 2 Gen 2 games. You don't need Gold and Silver specifically, it can be Gold and Crystal, it can be Silver and Crystal, and that's actually pretty cool. Now it's time to capture the other legendary bird, Lugia, the psychic flying legendary bird of the ocean. You'd think it would be water type. Joking aside, and if I may gush for a moment, Lugia is actually one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, especially when you consider the history behind his creation. He was created specifically for the second Pokemon movie. As I remember, the director of the film was gifted the opportunity to create his own Pokemon, and he created a grand slam if you ask me. Lugia is just awesome, which I think led to Silver version selling more than Gold version. That's kind of amusing. To be honest though, the battle is basically the same as the battle with Ho-Oh. Lugia also has Safeguard, Recover, and Gust again for some reason, and its signature move is Aeroblast, which is a flying type Hyper Beam of sorts that temporarily turns it into Shadow Lugia. Wow, I guess Shadow Lugia was just regular Lugia with the colors inverted or something. Maybe James Turner isn't as creative as I thought. That's just a joke, James. I still love your work. According to what I've heard online, it's actually ideal to use Heavy Balls instead of Ultra Balls for capturing Lugia. Heavy Balls are meant to work better on heavy Pokemon, of course, and it turns out that Lugia is heavy enough that Heavy Balls actually have a much bigger impact on the catch rate than Ultra Balls do. Due in part to Heavy Balls having a weird effect on the catch formula. See, they actually add to the catch rate instead of multiplying it, and in this case the amount added results in a greater total than if you just multiplied a really weak catch rate, so that's actually really interesting. Even though in my case I resorted to Great Balls because I ran out of Heavy Balls. Turns out the catch rate is still really low, even after maximizing it as much as you can, but I still managed it. But boy oh boy is this getting expensive. I had to spend a bunch of Ultra Balls and a bunch of Great Balls, and I had to go back to Kurt over and over for more Heavy Balls. That's legendary Pokemon in a nutshell. Like, you could have 90 Ultra Balls and still fail to get them. It's almost like there should be a Pokeball of some kind that captures anything instantly without a chance of failure, and they should probably be mass-producing these. Oh well. So, one escape rope later, we're out of here. And now it's time to return to New Bark Town, as we were told to go there and surf to the east to reach our next destination. However, we should actually stop and see Professor Elm first. I didn't show this, but you get a call from Professor Elm once you have the 8th badge. He says he's got an item for you. And that item turns out to be... wait for it. A Master Ball. An item that will catch any Pokemon without fail. So, who wants to tell the professor that we already caught all the legendaries and we don't actually need this anyways? Well, you get it in all 3 versions, so there's probably something we can use it on. We could always use it on the level 70 version of the legendary birds. Then again, I do like to show off every now and again, so maybe I will just toss it in front of the legendary like I did with Mewtwo. Well, it's time to head east out of New Bark Town, and I should mention that as soon as you set foot onto Route 27, you're actually not allowed to fly back to any of the previous towns because you've technically just entered a brand new region. Yes, as this NPC says, apparently to anybody who passes by, we have entered the Kanto region. If you check the Pokegear map card, which still works apparently even though this is an entirely different region, you might notice that the Kanto region looks a little bit familiar. Like, say, it might be the setting of Gen 1? Yes, I'm sure this is not news to anybody who's played Gen 2 already, which is probably everyone, but back in the day, when playing Gen 2 for the first time, imagine the hype that you get when you find out that there is an entirely new region to explore, eventually, after the Elite Four are dealt with, of course. Whether you had played Gen 1 already or not, this is probably a really big shock because either there's an entire other region of the game to explore, or you get to re-explore a region you were already familiar with. Maybe something's different now. We'll find that out eventually. For now though, I almost feel like I should apologize for constantly interrupting the music with surfing and going in caves and stuff, because the Route 27 theme is legit one of the best songs in the entire game. I love it so much. I get such a rush of nostalgia when I hear it, whether in chiptune or the remix that they have in Heart Gold Soul Silver. At any rate, you need Waterfall to traverse this cave, and there's actually a moonstone over in the corner. You already saw me pick it up, so that's nice too. This game's been quite a bit generous with moonstones, even though they come from Mount Moon, which is nowhere near here. Weird. The trainers here are decently powered and varied for this part of the game, but you can avoid most of them if you want to, especially in Crystal version. I think most of the trainers were actually made completely optional in Crystal version, but you still have to fight a couple of them. There's really not much to say about them at this point. They're still pretty much cannon fodder for the most part. You can also acquire the TM for Solar Beam on this route, but you need Whirlpool to get to it, and I'm not really in the habit of keeping all of my HM users on me at all times. And it is a little annoying that you can't fly back to Johto from this region if you want to maybe go grab your Whirlpool user. You'd actually need a teleport user if you wanted to get back there straight away. And here we have a rest house in case you were getting weary after all of the fighting along the way, which is nice of them to do. And that tree there has a burnt berry, I think. It's either a burnt berry or an ice berry, something completely useless. I mean, do you see any Pokemon at this point inflicting burn or freeze status? Freeze is a really rare status effect as it is. Anyways, you can take a small detour here to get a max elixir, and then we have a trainer who actually mentions the rival character. It seems he's been through here too. It really is nice that you hear about the rival from the generic NPCs along the way. Really helps sell him as a more villainous character than you're probably used to out of Pokemon. We are finally at the Badge Gate, which means Victory Road is right in front of us. The Badge Gate now checks for all of the badges at once instead of one at a time like in the last game, which might kill the tension just a little bit, but it is nice that they check for all of them. I hear that the Badge Gate is programmed oddly though, as in it doesn't check for all of the badges, just the ones that you don't absolutely have to have in order to even get here, like the Rising Badge, as that enables Waterfall. But I've never heard of any sequence break that lets you get here without all the badges anyways. Victory Road can unfortunately be a disappointing part of the game if you were expecting maybe a bunch of really tough trainers on the way to the Elite Four. The dungeon is exactly the same as it was in Gen 1, however it lacks any of the strength puzzles, it lacks any trainers whatsoever, and there are no legendaries to capture, of course. There are some items to pick up, including a TM that you probably really want. It's the Earthquake TM, so just a small detour to get a really strong move is actually a pretty good idea. But seriously, normally there would be a bunch of trainers that talk about the Elite Four and how awesome they all are, and then they test you to make sure you're ready for them. But there's nobody here, which also means that you can't level off anything but the wild Pokemon that I've been repelling away, and to their credit, the wild Pokemon are a pretty decent level for grinding. They do give out a decent bit of experience. They're like, level 35 to level 38, somewhere in that ballpark. And they're mostly ground and rock types, so grinding is not really that tough for most Pokemon in here. Odds are you've got something that can exploit their double weaknesses, and you could just teach Surf if you've got absolutely nothing. There also might be more hidden items like that max potion I picked up a moment ago, but I didn't look all of them up, so I don't know for sure. You're on your own for that one, guys. Get your item finders ready. Come to think of it, maybe the reason there are no trainers in Victory Road at all is because Silver already mopped the floor with all of them. He's here too, and he's ready for one last bout before the Elite Four. Though to be honest, I'm not really sure what to say at this point. He's basically the same as he was last time. He's got 6 Pokemon now, that's nice, and they're all decently leveled. Much like the previous rival battle, however, as long as you hit all of his Pokemon with moves that they're weak to, you basically get through it just fine. Like, look at this, he leads off with a Pokemon that's double weak to fighting. Nice. To be honest though, I've been doing some thinking about the gameplay role that the rival serves in this series. When it comes to the gym leaders, I've basically come to understand them as walls that the player is meant to find a way around. It's harder to simply run them over with super effective moves like you could in Gen 1. In fact, in Gen 1 you could just run them over with any move you like. This time around though, the gym leaders feel like puzzles you have to solve, and there's definitely more than one possible solution to each of those puzzles. I've definitely had a lot of fun coming up with my own weird solution to each gym leader, as you have seen throughout this playthrough. When it comes to the rival, however, It's my opinion that the rivals in this series are there to make sure that your team is diverse. You're keeping a well-trained variety of Pokemon, because he has a well-trained variety of Pokemon as well, so as long as you have something to deal with each of his Pokemon, you should be alright yourself, rather than if you had simply trained a single Pokemon and fed all the experience points throughout the game to it, which was a pretty big problem in Gen 1. It was really easy to do that and steamroll the entire game with a single Blastoise, for example. Which is what I did in my playthrough when I was playing Blue version. So in a nutshell, gym leaders have a gimmick that you have to find a specific solution for, and the rival is there to make sure you're keeping a well-trained team. That's my opinion. And it's still possible to solo the game with a single Pokemon. I'm sure someone has done it. I mean, just look at this Marowak sweep right here. This is awesome. But then again, that's because Marowak is awesome. But I really think these games are trying to get you to use a variety of Pokemon. It was very easy to fall into that trap of only using a single Pokemon because these battles are one-on-one, right? But to get the most enjoyment out of this series, and especially in Gen 2, I think going for as much variety as possible will actually be beneficial to your enjoyment of the game. Although I gotta say, looking at this rival battle again and seeing this Marowak sweep, it is pretty odd that this rival battle has so many Pokemon in it that are weak to ground type. Especially if you pick Chikorita as your starter, because then the rival is going to have Typhlosion. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it took until the last battle with him before the Elite Four, but he finally got the final evolution for his starter. And he's probably going down in 2 turns from Bonemerang, just like all of the other ones. Well, all the other ones went down in 1 turn. And due to a stroke of good luck, Typhlosion actually goes down in 1 turn as well. It took both hits from Bonemerang, but the second one was a critical hit. That's actually a change to the multi-hitting moves in Gen 2, whereas if one of them crits in Gen 1, then they all crit. Each individual hit in a multi-hitting move now has an individual chance of getting a crit. The rival has been defeated yet again, and this time around it seems he might finally be seeing the light. Let's hope he decides to stay out of our hair for the foreseeable. Now that he's out of the way, it's worth noting that if you've made it this far, you can actually fly back to the Pokemon League whenever you want, because it's now unlocked as a fly location. And you can't fly back to Johto yourself, but inside the Pokemon Center here, they actually put a guy with an Abra who will teleport you back to New Barktown if you want. And if you want to return quickly, all you have to do is surf out to Route 27 again, and then you can fly instantly to the Pokemon League. Which you might want to do because the Elite Four are coming up and they're always a challenge in this series. I don't really remember much about the Gen 2 Elite Four, but I suppose that means the next video will be an adventure for both me and the viewers. So, next time we take on the Elite Four. As always, I'm gonna try and make it as entertaining as possible, and I have many Pokemon that I can choose from, so it's time for me to figure out how to best humiliate these suckers as bad as I can. See you later for that, everybody.